Rania is a filmmaker at the end of the day, and this is what we really wanted to convey. Well, so it wasn't easy, but it was.
But it was, I think it did read as a filmmaker. I mean, it was a small TV, if I remember well.
It was a small orange TV, right? Yes,
Yeah.
and it was, and then we had that big screen with that 10 minutes video.
Yeah.
It was a big explosion. And then we had those stills, those images, like a series of images of Rania and the parallel of her with Sigourney Weaver, who played in, who was the first female actor to play Replay.
Right.
And that science fiction, comment s'appelait le science fiction movie? Alien.
Ah, right. Could we maybe, I mean, I think Rania is such a reflective artist, and she's one of your artists. I mean, it might be a nice thing to just reflect on what you think she captures in her work that is true of the place that you're in.
Well, Rania, first of all, yeah, she's a filmmaker. She loves to play with images, not objects. Her word is images. And her word is how you edit image, how you construct image, how you create a circulation between image. She always quote Godard, montage, mon beau souci. She loves mounting. She uses for that a lot of archives, whether it's her personal archives or archives from the cinema. She's very much influenced by the Arabic cinema. Egyptian cinema, which is the first Arabic cinema per se to develop. She did this big feature on Suad Hosni. I don't know if you've heard of it or saw it, which is amazing. You probably saw it. So it's all going into images, creating a new I can't say story, but a new language with her images. And this is what's really fascinating with her. She plays with them like a painter would play, you know, like a painter would use his brushes, or like anyone would use a different material. For her, it's all about that. And for her, she always also uses this thing where 1 + 1 is not equal to 1 + 1 = 3 or something. She doesn't, because there's always this superposition of it.
Yeah.
Okay, this overlap, etc. So this is what really fascinates her, and what's impressive that there's what comes out of it. Of course, she also uses sound a lot. Sound is very important for her. Same thing, she will go into different archives, musical archives. She loves to dance, she loves to move. So speaking of space, speaking of body, she's really someone who's very much
a performer.
By that. And well, she creates a new form, she creates a new language. And this is what's fascinating. And speaking of space, she creates a different space. She did this film on trains, for instance, called Train Train, where she went to, where she created a new path. She went in the city. We have people at the gallery. It's an open space.
Nice, that's wonderful.
So you're seeing all the visitors coming.
I think that's really great.
Yeah, so she creates narratives with those images, and she creates therefore a new we need a different word
and language.
Voilà. Exactly, and this is what's really fascinating with her.
But Rania is an established artist, right? She's maybe
an established artist, yeah.
In a way, she's also had that trajectory where she's been outside of Lebanon and then back in Lebanon, and then processing that space from maybe outside of it and then from within. And I just wonder how maybe, because you represent a lot of young artists as well, so I wonder what's the effect of an established artist that has sort of charted the territory, and then how does that then allow younger artists to sort of find their own ways?
Well, what's interesting with Rania is 62 or 63, I forgot. So she's been spending years filming in the city and witnessing different, she filmed in the city, she filmed abroad also, but she's been a witness for a lot of different events, different stories, everything that happened all through the years, all the evolution, whether it's in the art world, politically, culturally, socially, etc. And she would translate them in her work, always. For the young generation who's new and who's trying to find a new ways or new language to express, because in the end, everyone wants to express or try to translate what's around us, where what influences us, what really speaks to us, what motivates us. Basically, it's our social surroundings, and they're all, but whether it's Rania or whether it's another artist, let's say Lamia, who also works a lot with archives and documents and narrates history, local history. So they try to find different means to do it. And they try to, they're very much influenced by them, but they need to find their own language, new means, and different ways to do it. But this is what's interesting. So we expect, we when we show younger artists, we see that, and it's quite interesting. Even when they exploit a space, when they show in a space, you can see also how they interact differently.
It is interesting because presumably also the young artists are responding to a whole new set of problems that they encounter as a generation, right? In a place.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, because you are in a way so open, and even with the story of your gallery, maybe for now, if you're just staying on that, talking a little bit about the gallery first, the place where it's located in Beirut, and the actual story of reconstruction, which we can maybe talk about following the blast. But there is and this is what I get from some of my AA friends who have returned to Lebanon, is that activism seems to have become a mode of living in Beirut. It's just a very outsider impression that I get, that maybe the political system and the system in general is quite difficult to navigate and complicated and conflicting. You're in a way, you're a private gallery, but this activism might still prevail in the work. And how do you resolve that? How do you cherish that? And then how do you guide that? And how does that become a productive force?
Well, I don't know if you can talk about activism. I think when you open a gallery like ours in Beirut, it is a political involvement or a political gesture or something, because in a way you're opening, especially where we are in the port where the blast happened. And the port is a very particular place because around us, it's all the custom area and all it's heavy duty, and we are here a contemporary art gallery. It's completely paradoxal. And, but very interesting. When I first opened, my husband told me no one's going to ever come here. And I don't know if you've been to Beirut. Have you been here?
I haven't.
You have to come. But Beirut is Beirut is a very small city, and we are at the entrance of the city. And basically we are, at the entrance. You just have to turn right. You end up in this whole area, which is crappy, which is all warehouses and low buildings of customs. Trucks. So this is where we are, and no one ever turned right because it's all, there's all taxis because we're in front of the highway and of a bus station where all the refugees and all people coming from Syria come and go. So there's a lot of taxi who recuperate those people. This is where we are, but we are at the entrance of the city. It's tiny. 5 minutes from the gallery is a very chic the very chic downtown, literally 5 minutes by car. So, but no one ever ventured where we are. And when I saw the space first, that was also important. Location, space, it's two old garage that were not used for 50 years. They're narrow, but they're long, with high ceilings, etc. So that also was important, the location, the space, all of that. And then, so that's the first gesture. You're opening in a place that's symbolic, that has a meaning, and all the connotations of the fort. The port is exchange between us and the outside world, all the metaphors that you can come out with the port. So that's the first thing. We opened also, I remember, in the middle of the garbage crisis in 2015, but at the same time you had Aichi and Surso reopening, so it was creating it was a very interesting autumn. 7 years later, the blast happens where we are, 300 meters away from the gallery. Luckily, we were not here. We would have not survived. Everything is destroyed. I came down the next morning to check up on everything, but especially on our neighbors who survived or not, who didn't survive. Anyways, and I remember calling Laetitia, my colleague, and I tell her, the gallery was obviously devastated. It was like the end of the world. Water everywhere, smoke, heat. There's faces. It was literally like in a movie, like the end of the world. And I tried to save what was, what we could save inside the space. And I called Laetitia, my colleague, and I told her, we're going to reopen, we're going to rebuild, we're going to reopen. It was just like an impulse of, I don't know if it was like, a defeat to what happened, or just because we have to continue what we do and basically say fuck them, and but I knew that we were reopening. That was one thing I was sure of. It was all in the middle of COVID. I didn't know how, I didn't know nothing, but we had to reopen. And I talked a lot with our artists too, and we had very long conversations. Everyone was down, completely down. But I had one artist who was actually an architect who told me some things. Like she said, Sabah and she said, well, we continue what we're doing. We have to do what we do, and we can't stop. So let's continue. I was like, okay. It seemed obvious in a way. This is what we did. And this is what we did.
And you're saying that in that there is an act of political defiance in a way.
Yeah, because everyone was like, why don't you close and go open somewhere in Europe? And go open, everything was bad. Not only the explosion, we're going through a very harsh economic crisis. All the banks holding our savings, basically they didn't even hold, our savings disappeared. So it's not easy. We're working in these conditions. We have no president at the moment. No consensus, no one is agreeing on someone. So if there's a political vote, there's a huge economic recession. There was no accountability with the crisis, with the blast that happened in 2019. So all of that, but still we continue working. So that's easy, of course, obviously, but we do. But the act of rebuilding and the act of continuing is very important, and not leaving. A lot of people left and lost hope, which is completely understandable. But so these three acts, and it makes sense. It makes sense because we're still here in this strange place, showing art, presenting art, trying to show meaningful. We now we have a painting show, but normally we have a lot of conceptual shows. We had Kalinaon prior to that, which was an amazing show on entropy and physics and air. But it's not an easy show. You have to explain, but we still do that kind of thing because that's really important. You need to open minds. You need to educate. Like, we don't pretend to do that. We try to be like a small thing in this. And
Joumana, when you came back, because you studied in Paris and then you lived in Los Angeles, when you came back to Beirut, what were you very hopeful?
I didn't want to, but what saved my husband, he had sold his company in LA. He's like, okay, he always wanted to come back. I never wanted to.
Okay.
But what really saved me is because I studied architecture in Paris. I studied interior architecture at Penninghen. And because I've been always fascinated by culture, by art. I paint myself. I used to draw, I used to paint, I used to visit a lot of fairs and biennales for pleasure, so I started looking what's going on in the city, in the art world, and this is where I met Ashkal Alwan, and Christine Tommy asked me to be part of the board, and I did so. And I saw also the Beirut Art Center that was just opening, and same thing. I collaborated with them. I started looking at all these institutions, and little by little, I started, meeting all these artists, going into this cultural scene that I find it fascinating. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's a lot of great, amazing artists, amazing people doing amazing stuff. And that reconciled me with the country. This is why I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
There's people and everyone is trying to do its best. And still till now, there's a lot of things happening, which is completely surreal. Like, we can't understand. Little restaurants opening, little pop-ups. We opened a show, this show we opened 2 weeks ago, 5 galleries were opening that day a show. So it's like, there is something happening, there's, despite all this, it's a very paradoxical city, but this is what makes it.
I have a similar thing when I go to Belgrade, and you realize that there is so many people that are really engaged on a very high intellectual level in the work that they do, and you realize that there's a real thinking going on, and then they're making really interesting stuff, and then they're claiming all these spaces. So it gives you hope. But it's interesting that there were these disasters, and and it's an economic crisis, and it doesn't seem to, it doesn't seem to lead anywhere. So I wonder whether in this chaos that you're describing, whether in this chaos there is like a potential for something really authentic to emerge.
There must be. Yeah, of course, there must be. Authentic for sure. Interesting. Yeah, because why would you want to continue in such a chaos? I mean, there must be something, of course, there's some authenticity. It's easy to just like, okay, it's a gallery. It's not like something, there's no easy job, but this is particularly fun.
But when you let's say you go to Paris or London, and you come to fairs, and you see artists that practice in, like, London-based artists or New York-based artists. I mean, there is lots of conflicts in these big cities as well. But surely you feel like, wow, but our artists in Lebanon are really having to endure some level of difficulty that's on just completely different level. And
I don't really think about this, because I think every artist has his own struggle, and it's very difficult to be an artist, and you have already
wherever you are.
Yeah, you have already your personal issues and struggle, and I don't really, because I know how tough it is and how insecure we can be, no matter where we are, whether it's in a city. I mean, and if you look today, I mean, every city, every place has its own issues. Paris has also a lot of competitions. There's a lot of galleries. They have, and unless you're a very big gallery, it's also very complicated to survive. The art market in Paris is not an easy one. Same for London. So I think, no matter where you are, unless you're a big shot in a big gallery and you're super successful, it's quite complicated. Every country has its own issues. Some are tougher than others, or different than others. But no, I don't really think this way, because I know how.
I guess there is a certain level of privilege when you're in a center that's like an established art center, such as one.
Yeah, there is, because socially you're more protected. That's that could, of course, there is.
I met a wonderful, let's say, Australian artist who is an incredible sculptor. I mean, actually does these incredible, huge sculptures called Mona Ryder. And I remember her telling me, but, of course, if I was born in London and if I was based in London, I would probably be a world famous artist. But I am, in Canberra in Australia or something. And,
visit me and I'm so far away. No, but one example why it could be a privilege, because, for instance, when COVID happened and all these artists in Berlin were paid, the government sent them 1,000 or 10,000 euros each. So that's this is how they could be, one could be protected in a developed country, yeah, of course here it's, that means you've got, of course, some privilege working.
And I think another thing that I just really wanted to understand when it comes to Beirut and being in Beirut, because of the blast, because of the, well, there is like an ongoing economic crisis, but there was also conflict in early 2000s. There must be a sense of instability, or a sense of that maybe things can at any point get even worse, or that there could be another sort of.
Yeah, we keep going. I think we're used to it. You know, we could have, if I tell you the number of explosions we avoided, or I'm 45, I lived the war, I escaped during the war, I was 10. The next day our boat was bombarded, we escaped by boat to Cyprus. I mean, and I came back and went and left and under the bombs, and I've lived all this. Even in 2006 when the war happened, and before that there was always car bomb explosion. We avoided 2-3 car bomb explosion. I mean, we've been living like that, but I think we live day by day and we try to enjoy a maximum. I think it's but it's all unconscious, all, you know, because it's all embedded in here, because you never know when things can stop. And I think the blast was like the most recent and the most impacting example. I mean, we could have been here and we could have been.
I mean, coming from Serbia myself, I very much understand this, what you're saying, you know, like things can happen, and if today is better than yesterday, doesn't mean that tomorrow is going to be better than today. But there is something in the West. I mean, now I live in London. There's something in the West where it's like unthinkable that tomorrow will be worse than it is today. I think there is this kind of expectation that things are always getting so much better, and that bad things only happen in the past, you know. But I think there is less stability in the everyday life, which maybe has like certain kind of resilience that's built into the work that you do and how you approach.
Maybe they've used a lot the word resilience here, and at some point everyone got against that word because we're not resilient, accepting what's going on and continuing. We're not, you know, there was all this big debate about the word, but at the end of the day, again, you just continue doing what you do, and you can't think too much about, because if you do think, then you won't do anything. You just stop doing, you know, you can't really think about all these things. It will stop you if you think, okay, now I'm going to have a show. But if I have a show next month, there's no president, there's this guy who talked too much, maybe they're going to blow him up. Maybe, you know, you start thinking like that, you won't do anything. The day it comes, there's a problem. We already had this during the revolution, burning tires in front of the gallery. So we'd call, you know, we'd call each other in the mornings like, we're not going to open today. There are burning tires. Let's close. Put a post on Instagram. Sorry, guys, we're close. So it's really, we're living day by day. It's surreal, but this is how we have no choice. This is how we've been doing.
Yeah.
We can't think too much about these things because you stop doing anything, especially.
You know, artists are usually the people that are the first ones to reflect on. I think the nice word that you're saying is surrealism. I mean, of course, it's an art movement, but I wonder how much this feeds into the work that's coming out of the city's art.
Is it surreal? No, well, I'm trying to think about our artists, how they do reflect this. Each one has its own ways. I won't go to surrealism necessarily, but each one has its own ways. We took a project by Barton Avakian 2 years ago to Basel. Right after, it was the first edition of Basel after the COVID in 2019. It was quite interesting because he had done this project with neons, abandoned neons, from all those vitrines and shops in the city, and that had to close because of the economic recession. And he took those neons and he assembled them, and he placed them in silicone, in those silicone cubes. And it was really interesting because it's like if those neons were reminiscence or fossils of those shops. So that was a way of showing. Is it surreal? Not necessarily, but it has its own language. It has its own And
I guess sometimes even showing things hyper-realistically is an act of surrealism, because the reality is so unbelievable that...
Absolutely. But like now the show we're having, it has nothing to do with that, but it's portraits of the artist's family and her best friends and her closest friend. I mean, but it's interesting because in those portraits, you'll see the eyes, you'll see each one has its own story, and the story is embedded in what we've been living. And the surrounding of the environment in which these persons are is all our environment, that we can identify easily to these people and where they're sitting or sleeping or whatsoever. So it's also a way of showing what we've been going through in a difference to a painting, to eyes. I think each artist has his own language. At the end of the day, yeah, it's also real, if you want to call it.
Yeah. When it comes to, so of course you're based in Beirut, and in a way processing the city and the country through the artists that you represent and through the work that's being exhibited. But there's also something about the wider region that, often in fairs and around the world, when your gallery shows up, it's actually seen as a voice of the entire region. So maybe it'd be interesting to just, if you could reflect on a wider impact and just something that goes beyond the borders of Lebanon.
If I look at the rest of our countries, if the region, when you say region, you're talking about the Middle East around us, right?
Yes,
those countries. When I see what's going on in Egypt, for instance, we have a colleague that we really like in Egypt. When I see that what's going on in Dubai, when I say Dubai, I can't qualify because Dubai is an island by itself. They have their own system, their own economy, but countries that resemble us, you've got Egypt, you've got Amman, but in Amman you don't have a lot of galleries. In Jordan, Egypt, you've got one or two, that's it. Syria, now it's a disaster. Some Syrian galleries are installed in Dubai. There's not much actually in the region, except for Dubai again, where it's really flourishing and guys.
But it's also very commercial, presumably.
So yeah, depending on the galleries, but we never showed there. I've been several times, but it was more. Well, Sharjah is doing a very interesting work. The Biennale of Sharjah is amazing. The Food is doing a very, very interesting work, that also is it's quite representative, different than Dubai. It's something that's very well thought. So this is also say that there's not much galleries in the region. Beirut has a lot of galleries. There's Frieze, which is doing similar thing than we are doing. She's been here for a while, between Hamburg and London and Beirut. But so that's one thing that is interesting. So there's not much galleries in the region, and we've never exhibited except in Beirut. Also, we could have exhibited in Dubai, but I think that we quickly wanted to jump outside, if you want, in Europe.
Into the established art centers,
I guess so. I don't know, just to get, because we are here, because we're in the region, we wanted something quickly.
So maybe what that says is that I guess there isn't really a very large infrastructure for local artists that can, in a way, propel them to some kind of international.
This is what we were looking for since the beginning, actually, to have a wider reach. More risky, because I'm sure we could do better in Dubai. We've got all our compatriots there, and much more risky, much more costly, but in a way different and maybe more interesting, because we are reaching different audience, and it's more challenging. Of course, we were in LA 4 months ago. February. We even did a fair there called Felix.
All right.
Yeah, so we're trying, and I think I think it's more exciting to present artists and to take, even if you're taking this.
Yeah, I guess in that way they're in dialogue with more of the like world artists, right? With the contemporary.
It's a dialogue. It's something different that you're bringing in. It's another way of looking at things. It's another way of looking at art. It's a culture that you're bringing in too. It's another perspective. You're adding. I mean, you feel you're adding something. And what's really amazing is that you have all those people who are very curious. Oh, so this is an artist from Beirut. So why is he working this way? Why has he done this? And then you're bringing them in your own world, in the artist's world, but then in your own environment. And this is when, and therefore you create a dialogue. There's a dialogue and exchange that comes out of it.
Yeah, obviously, when you moved back to Beirut, that was when you discovered this incredibly vivid art scene. But I think what's also interesting is that maybe the question for you is, I'm sure that you're still discovering it, and that, and so I just want to ask, how do you still discover things? And like, how do you now, with your experience, see what is new or authentic or interesting or valuable, and something that you feel like this is something that we need to show the world?
Well, there's a lot of parameters, I think. First of all, you need to look a lot. You really need to look a lot and look nonstop everywhere, whether it's here, whether it's in, you really, really, the most important thing is to look and look and look and read. You have to be very knowledgeable. That's one thing. Another thing is when you meet a new artist, or you meet it has to speak to you. There's no secret. It has to really create something. It has to pull in you. It has to do this. It has to have meaning. It has to have meaning in the world we're currently living in. It has to echo to something. It has to be good. I mean, there's a lot of, sometimes it's not there. Sometimes there is something, but the work is not there. But still, you want to give a chance because you have the gut that this is going to go somewhere, and you have to take risks. And now we took a young artist. We believe in her. We think there is something, that the show we're having here, she's going somewhere, and we want to support that. It's the first young artist that we take out of her studio. But it's but it's really interesting, and I think it's important to give her a chance. That's the new one we're taking. We're taking a new artist too.
What's her name?
My Sam Hindi. That's the show we're having. But also we're having this other show that we're going to do in Paris in October, in Paris Basel, Paris. And we're going to show with a new artist called Mohamed Abdouni, but he's more established. He's a very interesting artist that did a whole work on archiving all the transgenre scene, and it's a first in the region and in Lebanon particularly. And he has this amazing film, amazing photograph. So when we encountered his work and we saw the film, it was brilliant. It was very interesting. It was a first, it's also very much in our times today. So all of that, it's really a mix of things. These are the two new artists we're going to work with, very freshly. They're different. One is a painter, one is a photographer. It's completely different mediums, different. But there is something that's really interesting.
That connects them, yeah.
And
maybe on this point of coming back and starting something new and engaging with the world that's there, that there is also something to do with institutions, the existing institutions of the city and of the country. And I just wonder, do you also see, as part of your role, to in some way impact how big art institutions of Lebanon approach art or approach young artists?
Well, there's not many institutions. That's also one. There's the Beirut Art Center. Yeah, that doesn't make it. Here we have less. We have the Beirut Art Center. We have the Arab Image Foundation, but they have their own. They work on old photographs. They're recreating the history. But as far as institution, and there's Ashkal Alwan, but Ashkal Alwan is more like a residency program, and they try to do every 2 years a Biennale, which is this big show that happens in the city with exhibitions and performances and all of that. But that's about it. There's a museum, Sursaut Museum, that we can, it's more a museum than an institution, but they do show. Now, actually, what's interesting that both the Beirut Art Center just opened with a big show showing one of our artists, two of our artists, and Sursaut is reopening on Friday after the blast, after, you know, I've been reconstructing everything, with also one of our artists. But in general, you know, it's a very small word. It's a small, in Beirut, it's a small word. We know each other very well. How do we help? We just talk to each other, we communicate. There's the director of the institution who has its own plan, who has its own route and programmation. And depending on that, they'll give you calls. I want to show Ahmad because I'm doing a show on this and this and this. I want to show. It's very fluid in a way, but each one has its own. We don't interfere. We just if we need advice, we'll call each other. If we need, but I think each one has its own vision and the way and its own programmation, how they want to run.
Are they kind of free of politics at least?
In general, yes. Now it depends on each one because again, they have their vision and they have their you know, their program. So, but in general, yes, they're free of politics. Yeah.
I guess that's good to start with. And how about educational institutions, like places that teach the new generations of artists?
That's very important. Now they're trying to, I think they're doing, for 2-3 years, everything was very sleepy because of what happened. But I think more and more they're trying to do like kids programmation, you know, for schools. I think Sursaut is doing that. They're trying all, again, we're talking about 3 institutions. That's it.
Yes.
But I guess they're all trying to. And we've been doing this at the gallery. You know, one thing we've been doing at the gallery is those parallel programs where we do talks, screenings. We often have schools who come, colleges, universities, like art teacher would bring them here, explain the shows. They even do some tests here, which is really pass their exams here.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so for Kylie's show program, I was like, oh, Christian, that's a tough one. So, but that's interesting, yeah. And that's I think for me that's the most important part because this is what we need the most.
Yeah, I liked when I discovered that your first artwork that you collected was a poster of Le Corbusier.
Yeah, Le Corbusier. Oh, wow. Why did I say that? I forgot. Yeah, it was a Corbusier. I remember very well. It was in LA. This old antique shop or antique poster shop was closing in Santa Monica. Yeah, it was the first thing that I got.
And but somehow you've departed from architecture, apart from that poster.
I liked, but not only Le Corbusier, but I like the composition of that poster.
Of the poster.
The poster, I like its story because it was the poster of the Musée d'Art Moderne when one of his first shows there. But I think what struck me is the composition. There was something quite surreal, speaking about surreal. And the colors and the typo and how it was mounted, the story, the Corbu, all of that made sense. Like I'm getting my first artwork.
But there's also then something in this idea of collecting. There's always like a spark moment when you think, oh, I want that.
Yeah,
I mean,
very true. It was the first thing, and it started with this. It's this idea of collecting is when there's not it's something very compulsive.
Yeah, it's psychological.
Yeah, there's this idea of possession, this idea of wanting this because it speaks to you, because it has sense, because there's something, it's not necessarily beautiful, but it speaks to you. There's something in it that, you know, obviously tells you something and you want to live with it. You want to take it home, you want to hang it or not, but you want it to be yours. And it's very interesting, actually.
So was it that poster sparked something that then kind of became like a chain reaction, and then you became a collector, or?
I was 22, I was 23, I was young, I was shy, and I was like, oh my God, it was $500, I still remember, and I was like, shit, that's $500, you know, I could buy
Not bad for an
dresses, and
original
instead of
poster.
buying 2 or 3 dresses, I went to buy this poster. So I didn't have any money. I told my husband, you know, I was not working, I was having kids. So I was like, can we get this? I remember, and it was the first thing that was not necessary that I would buy and hang.
Yes.
You know, I was like, oh, that's the poster.
And then what was the second thing?
The second thing was completely different. It was always in LA. It was a painting from Hope Atherton. It was like 2 years ago, 2 years after that Corbusier. At Bergamo Station, there was this gallery, I forgot its name. Bergamo, I don't know if you've been to LA, and if you know Bergamo Station, where all the galleries used to be. I hang out there. There was nothing. It was in the early 2000s. LA was, I never went downtown. I didn't know Blum and Poe, and I told this to Tim. He was very vexed. I'm sorry, I didn't know that you guys were there. I mean, it was all new. Everything was new. And then there was this show on Hope Atherton, who's this artist, was not really working anymore, but she used to do taxidermist. And she used to paint those dead animals, actually. But it was very well painted. It was huge paintings. It was quite impressive, dark. And I don't know, I saw the show. I saw very good paintings. Something was like calling me like that. And even my husband was like, oh, wow. And he's in tech. He has nothing to do with art. But he was with me. He saw me, very interested by the show. And, you know, galleries can be very stuffed, like, oh, give us your name. I'm not sure it's
you don't really
available. The whole story. We call you. This one is free. So
desirability. That's how you create.
And I got shit. I want that painting. I want that painting.
Now I want it.
It's a very interesting one because it's a bear. It's a monkey, I think, but you don't really see the shape of a monkey holding a baby. It's called Sanctuary. And it's actually very well constructed. It's on, you know, you can see the stairs, you can see that baby holding, and it's a big painting. The colors are, and the depth of it is very well done. It's very alive, actually. This is what was interesting.
Textured.
It really makes sense, and it just spoke to me. And that's
amazing. Well, I get because I'm thinking it's not really that when you buy the first piece that you become a collector. It's actually when you buy the second piece that you actually.
Yeah, exactly, and that triggered a lot. And what's interesting is that this artist she stopped doing because she married Gavin Brown. I don't know if you remember the gallery, Gavin Brown. She was his wife, which I didn't know back then. And I think he must have been. I mean, she stopped painting since, and she worked more with stuffed animals and did some pottery. And I saw Gavin once, and I told him, listen, I have a painting in Beirut, and he was shocked. I saw him in Brussels at Independent, and I told him, he's like, who are you? And you have a painting, my wife? I was like, yeah. And I showed him the painting, and he was very emotional. I said, she's not painting anymore. What has she been doing? And then he shows me a picture of his daughter.
Okay.
And this is what she's been doing. And I was a bit pissed off. I'm like, seriously? I mean, she's so talented. She has to continue. So, but I told him, tell her she has a painting in Beirut.
And is there any other piece that you brought from that is a very important piece from, let's say, LA or Paris?
I do have some nice pieces. I buy much less now because I buy my own artists. Yeah. And that's a lot.
You have a different relationship to objects now, because
but I do, yeah, because now I try to be. I can't afford. I can't buy, and I have to. I can't do that. But I have interesting pieces that I really like. I have a Louise Nevelson piece. Speaking of architecture, a little collage, and I bought this in Brussels. It was, I think, the first time they take her out. At Pace Gallery. In one of those first Brussels fairs back then, I forgot when was it. And it's before she had Venice. It's before. And what I really liked in this collage is that you've got this wooden shape of a wheel. It reminded me of Man Ray, the wheel of Man Ray. it was really so delicate. It's a very, very delicate collage. I just like loved it. It's very, there's this equilibre in it, and
like a composition.
Composition. Yeah, I really liked it with those tiny pieces of wood that she
Yes.
it made sense. It was nice.
Yeah. Have you been in London recently?
Yeah, we're doing Frieze London this year.
Wonderful.
We're showing two artists. We're going to show one who's an architect originally and who studied at the AA, Paula Yaoub. Yeah.
What's his name again?
Paula.
Paula. Okay, I'll look it up.
We're showing beautiful photographs that she did, I think, when she was at the AA still. She was doing this work on water. She was doing this project. She has a very interesting story with the AA. She was doing this work on water, and she was trying to define the shape of objects, how the water gives a shape to the objects and vice versa. She did a very interesting study on that, and we're showing black and white photographs. Beautiful. And then we're showing a painter who's Lebanese Armenian, who lives in London, who studied at Central Martins.
Okay. Central St. Martins, yeah.
Yeah. And who also had the John Moore Prize in 2018. She's a very good painter. So we're doing like a dialogue between these two. We read paintings, deconstructed items,